This is different. So I wanted to make a video where I could show people what it takes to start programming. To get started with any language, the very first thing that you're going to need is a way to convert the code that you write into an actual program. Every language is different, and every language has multiple ways of compiling or running the code that you write. I'm just going to show a few examples of those in this video right now. Let's say you're an absolute beginner and you just started looking at programming languages. You will probably most likely have heard of the major ones: C++, Java, maybe Python, JavaScript. If you're weird, Fortran. I'm going to show how I would go about getting started in one of these languages and what it takes to start programming in them. First, I'm going to start out with C++. For C++, there's a lot of ways that you can program in a dedicated IDE, such as Visual Studio, or you could even just type all of your code into a text editor and then compile it. I'm going to show both methods for doing that. You can decide which one you like better. So the first one that I'm going to do is the more tedious one, the more techie one, the more logistical one, how to program in a text editor. So I'm going to download a compiler, and I like MinGW. So when you go to MinGW's page, you should see a download section. You'll click download latest version on SourceForge's webpage, and it should download the program after a few seconds. Then go into your downloads folder and launch MinGW. Install in the default location is absolutely fine. You wait for the installation process. It does take a bit of time. And then click continue when it's finished installing. You should see this window. I should probably mention MinGW isn't a compiler itself, but it is a package manager for several well-known compilers. I'm going to go in here and select MinGW32 base and MinGW32 GCC G++. G++ is the GNU open source compiler. I just associate the word GNU with open source at this point. If you don't like the idea of having to type G++ and whenever you want to run a C++ file, you can also write C++. It's aliased out so that you can write either one. Next step is to click installation and then click on apply changes and click apply. It will then download the rest of the packages and files that you need to use the MinGW base and C++ portions of MinGW. These are the compilers in this case. If you click this button, then you'll know when it's finished when this window closes. In the meantime, what you could be doing is go into wherever your MinGW installation is. Mine is just in the standard C directory. I got here by clicking this PC, opening up the C drive, and then finding MinGW. Go inside to the bin folder, and you should find C++ and G++ are there. These are what you're going to be using to turn text files into programs on your computer. Now that MinGW has finished doing all of its installation for the compilers, I'm going to close that window. Next, I'm going to show a quick example of how I would go about compiling C++ code with the MinGW compiler. First, I'm going to go in here and enable file extensions so I can change the file extensions of the files I'm going to be creating right now. I'm going to go into New Text Document and change this entire file's name to new code.cpp. C++ files are stored as CPP files. It's going to ask if you want to change the file extension. You need to click yes so that it is no longer a text file, it is now a C++ code file. Now I'm going to right click it, I'm going to click edit, and I'm going to write some code. And this is going to be some very simple code. I'm not going to explain what this code does right now. I'm just going to say that it opens up a new program, says hello world to the screen, and then waits for user input. I'm going to click save, close the window, go up here, open command prompt, and I'm going to type C++ new code.cpp output -o new code.exe, and I'm going to press enter. It will then look like nothing happened. And if we go down here, we should see that there's a new program called new code.exe. When we open it, it says hello world. When we press enter, it closes. Very basic. Now there's a very few quirks here. They're very annoying and weird, and I'm going to show you how to get around them. Do you need to be in this folder that's in some random folder in your C drive? No, you don't have to. Do you need to have all these other files in the same folder to be able to compile? No, you don't have to. I'm going to show you how to fix those right now. I'm going to delete these new files because I want to make sure that this directory is clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here. I'm going to copy the location where all these programs are. I'm going to click on the start button, and I'm going to type in environment variables, and I won't even have to type in the entire thing. I see it right here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into environment variables and find path and I'm going to click edit. Added onto this, I'm going to make sure that there's a semicolon here. I'm going to paste the location of my min.gw bin directory. When I click OK, and I click OK here, and I click OK there, I will be able to make a folder anywhere on my computer, like the desktop, call it new project, whatever you want, really. It doesn't have to say new project. Create a new text document there, call it anything I want. .cpp. I'm going to insert the code I had from the other program file so that there's just this one file by itself in here. I'm going to open up a command prompt here, and I'll be able to run the same command for compiling without having to be in the folder where C++ is. I'm then going to run the compilation line. You'll see it succeeded, and then I can run this code. This is the neatest and cleanest way to program because you can just make a new folder, add in a CPP file, put your code in there, compile it using the command line, and you're done. There's ways to shorten the amount of time that it takes to compile your code, but I could only get into them in a different video. For example, you could add a button into certain text editors that will run a command from the command prompt that will compile your file for you and run your new file that you make. There's tons of ways that you can do this, and I'm not going to show them off here. Instead, I'm going to show off how to use Visual Studio instead of a command line compiler for people who want a more in-depth feel when they're programming. Visual Studio is a program made by Microsoft. There's a free version called Community, and then there's several paid tiers. The Community one will let you do pretty much anything that you want. The only things it won't let you do is use more than like 100 cores in a program or like 80 gigs of RAM, some crazy stuff. They won't let you see their intense debugging features that are made for data centers and servers. If you're a student, you can actually get the Enterprise Edition for free, but I'm just going to show how anyone can get the basic version of Visual Studio that has plenty of tools built into it for free right now. I'm going to Google Visual Studio Community. I'm going to click the first link right here. I'm going to download VS Community 2017. This one takes even longer. Oh, wait, it's done. Oh, okay. Oh, wait, it's done. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the wait. You can close this window while you're waiting. Almost there. Oh, so when it finishes loading, you'll see this option if you want to download a bunch of extra tools and things like that. You really don't need any of these things. You can check all of them anyways. It's going to use a lot more memory on your computer. If you do so, the base installation is only 600 megabytes. You can also install things like Python, Node.js. You can even make Android apps inside of Visual Studio using a pretty cool framework. You can even download Unity from here if you wanted to. Linux deployment, if you want to be able to compile your programs for Linux. If you speak Italian, you can download Italian mode. If you speak Portuguese, Russian, or French, you can download Portuguese, Russian, or French mode. And there's a bunch of other nerd tools. I'm just going to do the base installation of 600 megabytes. And now it's going to take a bit longer. I think it's almost done. I'm not sure. There we go. So I'm going to click launch, and I think I can close this window as well. And it asks if you want to sign in. It's going to make you sign in through your Microsoft account. You don't have to do that. You get some extra features if you do. Always use dark mode because only villains use blue extra contrast, or light mode. And here we go. Here's Visual Studio. It looks pretty daunting at first, especially if you've never programmed, but I'll walk you through what it takes to get a program started up. So I'm going to go up here, click File, New, and go over to Project. You need to think of Visual Studio as it's a way of creating a project instead of a way of just creating an individual program file. I'm going to go with the blank solution right here, and I'm going to name it New Project VS. It's going to become a lot harder to rename your project files when you're using Visual Studio. min.gw doesn't care when you're using a compiler by itself, because the compiler doesn't care where your files are, when they are, when you give it the file, when you try and compile it. But Visual Studio tries to keep track of a lot of other things, like what files you're linking to outside of the project, what files you want to use, data files, source files that affect your code. You don't need to think about those kinds of things. Just know that when you're creating a new project, it's going to be a lot easier to not rename anything later, unless if it's in your code. So I'm going to create my project on my desktop, and I'm going to double click on this, and now this is a blank solution. I have no idea what solution means. Visual Studio seems to like that word a lot. I have no idea what it means. Next, I'm going to click on New, File, and I'm going to do... Shit, I forgot to install C++ into Visual Studio. If you forgot to install C++ into Visual Studio, or you wanted to install any other modules into Visual Studio from the installer, you just need to open up the installer again, wait for it to load, and click Modify. Then just make sure that you check C++ and click Modify, and then it will actually install the 6 GB C++ compiler for Visual Studio. It is now a new day. I'm wearing a different shirt. Windows 10 should be fully up to date. Let's continue. You should go into your Start menu and find and open up Visual Studio 2017. And inside you should see this. It looks a bit confusing at first, but if we go in here and click File, New Project, then it should be pretty easy to start a new Visual C++ empty project under the name of New Project VC. I'm going to have it be stored on my desktop, and I'm going to click OK. So when we are sitting here in our new project, we're going to right click on Source Files and click Add New Item. We're going to add a C++ file. This is going to be our main source file. This is going to be where all our code is in at the very beginning before we add more files. I'm going to click Add, and it should add a new source file to our program. I'm just going to go and copy the code from the other project. Control A, Control C, and Control V. And to save and run your code in Visual Studio, all you have to do is click on this button here, the play button. This will start up the debugger, which will start up your program and attach itself to it so that it can tell you extra things about the program that's being run, such as memory usage, CPU usage, so you can tell it where to pause, so you can edit code while the program is actually running. Pause and then see what the values are stored in at certain locations so that you can get more information about what's happening in your program. I'm going to just click play right now and click yes. And there we have it. When it starts up, it will run the code and it is exactly the same as before. And that's it. I can save all, can close this program, and I now have this new Visual Studio project. And the way that you open it is you just open up the solution file, make sure that it is opening up in Visual Studio 2017, and we are back where we were before. Hopefully you can see how easy it is to start coding by creating a new project and making a new file for it, the same way that you would just make a new folder and then make a new file for having a text document and a compiler. I'm going to switch over to showing you how to use a different language called Python that is a lot more straightforward for the installation, and it is a bit different in terms of how the language itself works. Python is a lot different. It's a lot easier to install and it's a lot easier to get started and start using. And it even has the path variable feature that I showed you earlier. I'll show you how to use that too. To get started with Python, you just need to look up Python online. Python, putting Python in Google, going to their main webpage, and I'm going to click download. And on Python's webpage, you'll see version 3.6.4 and version 2.7.14. You might see a later version. Let me tell you what the difference is. A while back, a lot of old guys didn't like the fact that new updates were coming out for Python, and they wanted to make it so that their codebase would never have to change for their current use. They determined that the best way to do this was to get the entire Python community to agree on having 2.7.14 be long-term supported, meaning if a hack or virus would come out for it, it would be protected against that through a minimal patch without having to actually have any new features added to it. 3.6.4 has a lot of new features and will have a few different quirks to it that you can't necessarily use the same code for. It was an attempt to branch off and say that this is going to be separate Python from the current Python. It doesn't matter which one you use. It's going to matter a little bit if you decide to use them both at the same time. If you're programming Python with a group of people or with an organization, you should use whatever version that they're using. If you're doing it for yourself, if you're trying to get into programming or if you're learning, you should just use the newer version. It's got a lot more features that might be helpful for you. So when you click download, it should download, you open it up and install. When you're installing, there's an option to add Python 3.6 to your path. This is super useful and I'll show you why in a bit. Go ahead and click on it if you want to be able to use Python in the command line of your computer. I'm going to click install and click yes. It takes a bit. You can close the web page in the background. And now after setup is complete, go ahead and click on close. When you have Python installed, you should have 4 things in your Python 3.6 folder. You'll have idle, and you'll have Python by itself, and a few manuals and reading documents. You can find these documents online, but what we care about is these 2 versions of Python right here. Now, Python is an interpreted language, which means it doesn't have a compiler. There is a way to turn a Python script into an exe file. We're not going to do that. We're just going to show how you can use the Python program by itself to start programming and get some kind of result. If I open up idle, then you can see that I have what looks like a command line here where I can do things such as create a variable. I'm going to make this one say hello world, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to print this out by saying print wordy boy, and you'll see that that prints out hello world. Now when I say that Python is an interpreted language, I mean that when you have a Python script or a Python program, it is a file filled with Python commands that runs one at a time. When you have a Python script or a Python program, you have a file that has a bunch of Python commands that runs one at a time in sequential order. So if I were to click File, New File, and then right inside of it, print hello world, and then go ahead and click Run module. I'm going to save it to my desktop as new project py. Then it will run the script that I wrote and it will just say hello world. You can see that this is a lot easier than the other 2 languages I was using before because it's just one file that can be opened up inside of the editor and then I can run it and then the code runs. Believe it or not, but this is actually a good enough base in order to start programming with Python. One quick thing that I forgot to mention while editing this video is if you properly enabled the path variable feature that I mentioned before, you can go into a command prompt and from anywhere on your computer type in Python and it will start up a new Python shell, which you can do like anything that you want in it. You can run a Python script from the command line. It's very powerful and there's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. I think it's a good time that we start talking about Java and how Java works. I'm going to open up a new web browser and type in Eclipse. Go ahead and click on whatever the latest link is, click Get Started, and click Download Eclipse IDE. And then click Download 64-bit, and then click Download. That's a lot of buttons. Also make sure that you download the Java SDK right here at Oracle's website. You're going to need this if you want to be able to actually run the code that you write. I'm going to accept the license agreement, and I'm going to download the latest version for Windows 64-bit and wait for that to finish downloading. Alright, the Java development kit finished downloading, so I'm going to click on it to open it up. Click yes to install it, and click next. Click next, keep the default settings, and keep the original installation folder if you want it to be easy for the IDE to find where Java is located later on. After the development kit finishes installing, I'm going to install Eclipse. I'm going to close this window. I no longer need it. The installer should pop up after a few seconds. And I'm going to install the Eclipse IDE for Java developers. I'm going to accept the software user agreement and wait for it to finish installing. Now, I'd say Java is a lot closer to C++ than any other language, but what you're going to find with Java is that almost everything likes to be considered an object. If you want to have a single item, then it needs to create itself as an object. If you want to have a chunk of code that you can call by just saying one word, that's going to want to be an object. If you want to create a definition for what objects are going to look like, that's going to end up being an object. Pretty much everything just likes being an object in Java. Whereas in C++ it might be a bit different. You might have pointers where you can create something and then have it sit in a certain location in memory and then call it for multiple things. The idea with C++ is you get more things like memory management, and with Java you get more things like cross-platform capabilities. So you might be able to optimize your C++ programs better, but your Java programs will usually be able to run on multiple devices very easily. So Eclipse Eclipse has finished installing, so I'm going to go ahead and click launch, and it's going to ask me where I want to create a new workspace. Now this is the only part of Java using Eclipse that I don't really care much for, but the idea is choose a workspace where you know that you won't want to change it later, because every single workspace can have all of your projects in them. Or you could have a workspace for each project and switch between them. But the idea is that Eclipse will remember which workspace you opened last instead of being able to open up your project from a file. So I'm just going to choose this workspace that I'm creating right now to be on my desktop under a new folder called New Project Java. Now I'm going to click launch. And here we go. This is Eclipse. Now I'm going to assume the same thing that I would in Visual Studio by clicking File, New, Java Project. I'm going to name the project New Project Java in the default location. And I'm going to leave everything else exactly the same as it is. After my new project is created, I'm going to open up this little Java tab right here. I'm going to make sure that this new project Java is tabbed open, and I'm going to right click on SRC and state New Class. I'm going to call this one main. And since this is our first program, we need it to basically have all the starting code. I'm going to check this box and uncheck this box, and hopefully it will start us out with something decent. So I'm going to take out this to-do code, and I'm going to write the first line of Java code. It is going to say system.out.println hello world. Now you can see that Java does a lot of things like popping up with little text boxes here and there. It's another thing I don't like about Eclipse. Java in general doesn't have this, and you can use your own IDE, but Eclipse definitely does a lot of this, and it can get pretty annoying. I'm going to click Run, going to click Select to save, and here we go. Hello world. This is our entire project. I'm going to click, well, I guess it's already saved. I'm going to close this program. I'm going to click exit. And now when I open up Eclipse again, it should ask me if I want to use this workspace. I'm going to click launch. Of course, I can look in recent workspaces and look at older workspaces I've been in. These could be individual projects. And you should see that my code is still tucked away in here, and I can click run again, and there it is. So that's it for getting started with Java. It's definitely a bit stranger in terms of the way that Eclipse works, but it definitely has its upsides, as you'll find out as you start programming more and more with Java. The last programming language I'm going to be talking about today is Processing, which is a personal favorite of mine. You can find it by going to Processing in Google, and it should be the first link. I'm going to click download, and I'm going to download the Windows 64-bit version, and although I like them, I'm not going to donate. I have no money right now. So a good reason why I like Processing is because it is based in Java, but it has a lot of graphical stuff predefined. So you start out with a window, and you can do what you want with the window. When it finishes downloading, open up the zip folder and then just drag it out. I'm moving it to my desktop right now. You can move it to somewhere else on your computer, but it does not have an installer. When it finishes extracting from its zip file, I'm going to drag it into my documents folder. You don't need to do this. I actually keep a version of Processing on my desktop almost all the time. I'm going to pin it to my start menu, and it should be here. There we go. When it's installed and in place, you can open up Processing, go ahead and click run, and you should be greeted with this text box, which you can have it not show up if you'd like, and this window for code. Now I'm going to start a short program right now. The setup chunk is a set where code goes into, and it will only run this code once when the program starts. So I'm going to have it be size 300 by 150, and then I'm going to do draw, and this is code that is run in a loop over and over and over until you close the program. Get to add void because these are functions that don't return anything. And I'm going to have this draw text onto the screen, and the text is going to be hello world, and it's going to draw it at position 150 by 75. I'm going to put background before it so it doesn't fade in. And when it opens this up for the first time, you're going to see this. It's just going to ask you if you're willing to let your programs access the internet, which might be something that you use later on, but definitely not right now. I'm going to fix an error I had in my code, click run, and there we go. There is my hello world program. It's the only program out of all these that doesn't just show up in a command line. It actually shows up in a window, which is what I like about Processing. It took me almost no time to write this little bit of code. Now I have a window up on screen. It looks more like a final product. I am then going to save this project onto my desktop. and I'll be able to reopen this just by opening up the file itself. Processing files need to be inside of a folder with their name, or else they won't be able to make sure that they're still part of the project that they were originally in. You can copy and paste code in between projects, but it's not really a good idea to use files in between projects unless if they are, of course, helper files or background files. Yeah, the code works, and that's basically it for processing. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, please tell me. I'm willing to listen. I have notifications up on my phone for YouTube comments. Let me know if you have any problems. I'll try and help out if I can.